In this lesson, we're going to look at multiplying and dividing rational numbers. By rational numbers, I mean fractions and decimals. When we multiply fractions, you simply need to remember that we're going to multiply the numerators and we're going to multiply the denominators. So here's a couple fractions: numerator times numerator, denominator times denominator, and we have the answer. You may have to simplify or reduce your answer. Let's look at a couple examples. Let's look at these one at a time. Here we have a fraction of 2/3, and these parentheses means multiplication, and our other fraction is 1/4. So 2/3 times 1/4, we're simply going to multiply straight across with the numerators. 2 times 1 is 2. 3 times 4 is 12. 2 twelfths can be reduced to 1/6. Our final answer is 1/6. Let's look at example B. Here the difference is we have a whole number of 3 times a fraction of 3/4. What we're going to do is we're going to make this 3 a fraction by simply putting 3 over 1. So the new fraction is 3 over 1 times 3 over 4. So we do 3 times 3 is 9. 1 times 4 is 4. 9/4 is an improper fraction, so we're going to divide up. 4 goes into 9 2 times, which is 8. And then 9 minus 8, there's a remainder of 1 over 4. So your final answer is 2 1/4. Now let's talk about dividing fractions. When you divide fractions, you simply need to multiply the first fraction by the reciprocal of the second fraction, also known as copy dot flip, where we copy the original fraction, change it to multiplication, and we flip or use the reciprocal of the second fraction. Let's look at some examples. Here we have 8 divided by 1/4, or 8 divided by a quarter. How many quarters go into 8? So the first fraction is a whole number. We'll make it a fraction of 8 over 1. So we'll copy the fraction, change it to multiplication, and we'll flip the other fraction and make it 4 over 1. And then we multiply just like regular fractions. 8 times 4 is 32. 1 times 1 is 1. And your answer, 32 over 1, is simply 32. In our example B, we have a fraction of 4/5 divided by a fraction of 1/2. Again, we're going to change it to multiplication by using the reciprocal of the second fraction, or we're going to copy the first fraction, change it to multiplication, and flip the second fraction. Copy dot flip. So now we have 4/5 times 2, or times 2 over 1. 4 times 2 is 8. 5 times 1 is 5. 5 goes into 8 one time, with the remainder, which we find by subtracting 8 minus 5, which is 3, and we put it over 5. 1 3/5. Now let's look at decimals. When we multiply decimals, you need to remember to count the total decimal places and move the decimal point back the same amount when you find your answer. So let's look at an example. Example A says 3 times 2.25, or $2.25 times 3. We're going to start by writing 2.25 at the top. Multiply that times 3. Simply 5 times 3 is 5. 5 times 3 is 15. Carry your 1. 3 times 2 is 6, plus 1 is 7. And then 3 times 2 is 6. And then again, we count our decimal places. There are 2 numbers behind the decimal, so our decimal is understood to be here, and we move it back 1, 2. Our final answer is 6.75. Now let's look at dividing decimals. When you divide decimals, you need to remember that we're going to multiply both numbers by a power of 10 so you can divide by a whole number. Now, multiplying by a power of 10 is the same as moving the decimal. Each time you move it, or the first time you move it, it's 10. If you move it twice, it's 100. If you move it 3 times, it's 1,000. But if we have 4.58 divided by 0.2, we need to make this 2 a whole number by moving this point over 1 time. It means we got to do the same thing over here with 4.58, so it becomes 45.8 divided by 2. Let's work a couple of examples. In this example, we have 24.8 divided by 4. We're simply dividing 4 into 24.8. Now, we don't have to move a decimal at all for this one, so we can just move this decimal to the top right where it is. 4 goes into 24 6 times. 6 times 4 is 24. There's no remainder. Bring down your 8, and 4 goes into 8 2 times. That's your answer, 6.2. All right, now let's look at example B. We have 64 divided by 0.08. We're going to move this decimal 2 times to make that 8. So we need to move this decimal, which is understood to be here, 2 times, which means we're going to have to add a 0. So now it becomes 8 divided into not 64, but 6400. We had to multiply this by 100. So your decimal is now understood to be here, so let's make sure we move it up into our answer. 8 goes into 64 8 times. 8 times 8 is 64. You have a remainder of 0, and all you're going to do is bring down zeros. 8 goes into 0 0 times. 8 goes into 0 0 times. Your answer is actually 800. So when you are dividing by decimal, remember to move the decimal over as many times as you need to make it a whole number, and then do the same with the other number that you're dividing into.